Can I request you all to settle down? Thank you. So the reason I want you all to settle down is because we just want to make sure that if there are some spaces, we can invite some of our colleagues to join you. We will be starting in the next 5 minutes. So have now conversations on your table. There's a reason why you're sitting together. And one of you will tell us the gossip later. So have good conversations. Good evening. May I have your attention, please? I'm delighted to invite the Foreign Secretary of India, Ambassador Vikram Misri, to deliver the welcome remarks this evening. He is the host of this conference, and in many ways, this is the beginning of the business end of the Raisina dialogue, where we will now begin the debates and discussions. And to kick us off, let me invite the Foreign Secretary to speak to us. Ambassador Vikram Misri.
Thank you, Samir. You talked about beginnings, but remember, this is Kal Chakra. There's no beginning, no end. We just keep going on and on. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of External Affairs, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to Raisina Dialogue 2025. As you heard at the opening event earlier this evening, Raisina enters its 10th year this year. We would like to think that we've come a long way. The numbers tell their own tale. Compared to just 100 delegates in 2016, Raisina 2025 has 4,100 registered delegates, of whom 2,000 have flown into India for this particular edition. Compared to just 10 sessions of intense discussions in 2016, we will see no less than 125 sessions during Raisina 2025 over the course of the next 2.5 days. And from only 35 countries represented in 2016, the Raisina 2025 delegate footprint has gone to 131 countries. Clearly, if Raisina had been a stock, some intelligent investors would have made a lot of money and would have had a lot of relief from the mayhem currently ruling the markets. But it's not just the numbers that tell a tale. Over the years, the content and quality of discussions at Raisina have not just kept pace with the international churn, they have, in the process, shaped the evolving discourse on the key issues of our times. Be it regional conflicts, socio-cultural realignments, trade and technology disruptions, supply chain resilience, or environmental crises, sustainability, and growth and development. Since international order, especially one where rules are increasingly challenged, is often likened to a jungle, the importance of watering holes such as this is something that would not be lost on the audience here. Raisina, therefore, offers an apt global public square, as Samir likes to call it, and a crossroads, if you will, for free-flowing, multidimensional discussions while bringing a breathtaking diversity of opinions to the table. And the menu at the table this year is a full one, if not already overflowing. A world in which the push and pull of the forces of economic nationalism and globalization coexist, where there is growing skepticism towards multilateral institutions and an increasing preference for more transactional approaches, where techno-optimism seems to be growing in salience by the day, where strategic lenses are shifting, where budgets are being rejigged, where force postures are being reevaluated on a daily basis. All of this, it seems, would offer rich pickings for the deliberations at Raisina this year. Naturally, on an occasion like this, I am tempted to invoke the weighty vocabulary of turning points and the crossroads of history having been arrived at. But I will leave all of that to the wiser minds in the room. The only thought that I thought I would leave all of you with is something that I came across recently, because we often talk about the arc of history bending in this direction and that, and therefore it was particularly instructive to see this mentioned recently, which is that the arc of history that bends in a certain direction can also snap back without warning. And I think this is the point at which we remember Kal Chakra. And therefore, perhaps one thing that I would leave all of you with is something that I heard a character say in a movie that I saw recently, that what we perhaps need to do is to shed the arrogance of certainty as we meet to discuss the state of our people, the state of the planet, and the prospects for peace on this one world that we inhabit. I'm glad to see that all of you have found your tables and seats at those tables. In a day and age when that seems to be one of the more difficult things to do, congratulations on having achieved that. I wish you all a very nice evening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Misri. As is the practice at the inaugural dinner, we will have a special featured address by co-founder and chairman of Infosys, Mr. Nandan Nilekani, someone who is rightly recognized as a person who's authored India's technology and digital transformation in the past few decades, and someone who built the digital ID program as both within and outside the government, and built a whole cohort of youngsters, entrepreneurs, and believers who have embraced technology as a medium of transformative change. So to hear about this journey of India, innovation, transformation, and the road ahead, I am delighted to present to you Mr. Nandan Nilekani. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Samir, and it's great to be here. Namaste, everyone. And it's really a privilege to be addressing this extraordinary group of people who have come together at Raisina. I only have 10 minutes, so it's going to be a crisp presentation. I'll talk about India's tech journey and what's happened and what's coming. Now, those of you who have been coming regularly to India have seen that every year they come, something changes. More people have smartphones. More people are making payments on the roadside vendor with their phones. They are showing their phone to show their IDs. So something is happening around us. And these are changes that happened over many years. But at some point, they all came together. And as I realized today, they all came together the same year the Raisina dialogue was launched. So 2016 was the year that changed everything. On April 4th, 2016, India launched 1 billion Aadhaar issued, which were the IDs that we gave everyone. Today, there are 1.3 billion IDs. The next generation payment platform called UPI was launched on April 11th. On September 2nd, the central bank issued the guidelines for something which allows us to democratize credit. On September 5th, Jio launched the network with free voice and data for 6 months. November 8th was the withdrawal of currency notes. And on December 30th, the BHIM application was launched by the Prime Minister. So in the space of 9 months, everything changed. And now, when we look at what's happening, we have 1.4 billion people with a digital ID that's used 25 billion times, 2.5 billion times, 2.25 billion times authentications in a month. We have a very cheap, low-cost eKYC with which you can open an instant bank account. We have something called DigiLocker. Every Indian keeps their documents on their phone, their Aadhaar details, their driver's license, their vehicle, and they just show it anywhere they go. Thanks to the Prime Minister's push on formalization, he really pushed for the GST launch, And the number of formal companies in India has gone from 4 million to 14 million. UPI payments are 16 to 17 billion payments a month. It's now one of the world's largest payment system. FASTag, which unifies all our roads. So we already have great infrastructure and roads built. Complementing that is the FASTag system, something like Easy Pass in the US. But it's a simple single system across the country that does 384 million transactions. Everything. What you're seeing is that in the space of these 9 years from 2016, digital technology has got deeply embedded at scale and has become part of everyday life. Now, what is going to happen next? When you think about the digital revolution in India, you can think about 3 phases. The first phase, when the first phones came in the early days and all that, essentially the device was used for communications and entertainment. And this obviously was US big tech. You had Google and WhatsApp and Instagram and Snapchat and all that stuff. But actually after that, a lot of it has been done by Indian companies. So the next phase was payments and transactions. We have companies like PhonePe, which actually belongs to Walmart, which has about 350 million people doing payments in a month. We have Meesho, which is a very, very Indian-focused e-commerce platform with 1.5 million, 150 million consumers on that platform. We have Physicswala. This young man from UP used the combination of the phone, cheap data from Jio and others, and the YouTube and the UPI payment system, and created a large multi-billion-dollar company on education. So it's been dramatic changes happening there. And today we have companies like Zepto with 2 22-year-olds providing quick commerce everywhere. You have Rapido, which does 3.5 million rides a day on bike taxis and other things. And then you have a company called Urban Company, which has more than 50,000 people providing beauty services at home, air conditioning repairs, and so on. So you're seeing a revolution happening on the ground on different parts. And the next phase of this revolution is going to be, how do these people use their phone to work, learn, and earn? And that's the next phase. The job creation of the future will happen on the phone, just like everything else so far has happened on the phone. And the number of smartphone users will go from 600 million to 900 million by 2035. These ubiquitous phones everywhere, and the fact that they'll now be used to work and earn. What is fueling this? In India, 10 years back, go back to 2015-16, we had about 1,000 startups. Today, we have 150,000 startups. Our expectation is by 2035, India will have 1 million startups. Very few places in the world have, at that scale, transformed themselves by creating this huge avalanche of entrepreneurs. India is going to have one of the largest Gen Z kids in the world. We'll have about 380 million Gen Z people in 2035. All of them, they became 8 years old when the iPhone was launched. So they're all digitally savvy, AI literate, etc. And these guys are going to run the show for us. I mentioned to you Zepto. 2 22-year-old Stanford dropouts have built a multi-billion-dollar company. If you look at Pixel, advanced satellites for hyperspectral satellites, 2 27-year-olds. So there's a revolution happening with all these people leading forth. And therefore, you can expect to see 1 million startups by 2035. So when the economy is growing 6 to 8%, the startups are going to grow at 20% a year. And this is, we have not imagined what will this do to this society when there are 1 million ambitious, hungry, young people, men and women, building companies. And this is fueled by a very good debt capital. Today we have all kinds of debt in this country, whether it's venture debt or NBFCs, bank debt. And what's important is here again, a large number of fintechs, of financial technology companies are able to take this ability to every user. So people are able to get loans on their phone and so on. So there's certain democratization happening of credit. And the same thing has happened on the equity side. We now have a full cycle financing model from angel investing to IPOs. So a young company can get money to start a company, often from an entrepreneur who made money on his previous company. He can get venture capital, private equity, and finally he can go to public markets. Today, India is the most preferred IPO market in the world. It has the largest number of IPOs last year at 327, and the companies together raised $20 billion. So the largest market for IPOs in dollar terms is the US, but the largest market for IPOs is India. And this is only going to grow as we look at the next 10 years. In fact, a few years back, most of the companies were actually registered outside. They were in the US or Singapore. They're all flipping back. They're all changing the registration to come back to the Indian capital market because this is where the action is. And many of these companies, Zeptos, Razorpay, PhonePe, Pine Labs, have all switched the registration to India and paid a huge amount of taxes because they feel it's still worthwhile to be in India. So basically what you're saying is think about what's happening. 1 million startups in the next 10 years, debt capital of all kinds available to these companies, equity capital from angel to IPO, all there, and the world's best capital markets. So what you're going to see, you haven't seen anything yet. And you're going to see that in the next 10 years when we come back for the 20th anniversary of Raisina. But if you want to go from 6% growth, which we think is assured, to 8% growth, what is it that we need to do? One, we have to use the tools of AI and take it to 1 billion people. India's strength has been how to apply technology at population scale. How do you make it high volume, low cost, cheap, accessible? And we have to do the same with AI and allow people to use AI for education, for health, for language. How do we unite India's hundreds of languages in a way that people can talk to each other using AI? So this is a big part of what we need to do to get to that 8% growth. Second, while we do have a good capital story, there are a couple of things we can do even more. One is the ability of firms to use their own data to get access to credit, called the account aggregator scheme. Today, only about 10% of personal loans in India are using this system, and approximately 10,000 crores, about $1 billion or a little more every month is being given as credit. We can dramatically change this. That will, again, democratize financial services. And then, very importantly, 50% of Indian assets are in land. And land is not fungible, land is not tradable, and they are not able to take that asset and do something with it. And with the advent of technologies like tokenization, using public chains, we can make land fungible so people can sell their land or give their land as collateral and get credit. And if we can unlock 50% of the wealth of Indians in a way that they can get access to money, that's another cycle of change we'll bring. And then we have to look beyond the metros. Most of the action today happens in either the top 8 cities or the top 50 cities. But we have to spread this entrepreneurship across the country, especially in parts of India where there's not that much entrepreneurship. And therefore, that's a public policy issue. How do we get entrepreneurship in every nook and corner of the country? And we have 63 million small businesses, but only a handful of them are formalized. If we can get to 10 million formalized businesses out of the 63 million, again, you'll have something great happening. And then, very importantly, we have to turbocharge formalization. India is about 15% formalized. Brazil is about 60% formalized. So clearly, we have a long way to go in terms of formalizing our people. And for that, people should be able to take their experience certificate, go anywhere and get a job. They should be able to take their benefits and go anywhere when they change jobs or become entrepreneurs. And we need a way to deregulate business. And there are many moves afoot. I know Dr. Jaishankar is, they're all prime ministers thinking of the deregulation commission and so on. Fundamentally, we have to make it easier for these millions of businesses, easy for them to do business. Simplify things, reduce compliances, decriminalize laws, reduce the number of, make the language simple. Very basic things you have to do to make turbocharge formalization. So I believe that the economy already has the capacity to grow at 6%, and a few set of reforms, I believe, can take it to even 8%. And where the rest of the world is saying, how do we get growth going? How do we create an internal single market? How do we reduce regulation? India is now a single market of subcontinental proportions. It's a completely single market for labor. You can go anywhere and work. It's a single market for capital. It's a single market for mobile phones, single market for ID, single market for products with GST. And therefore, systematically, the efforts of Prime Minister Modi and his colleagues to simplify the market has created a huge single market. Complementing that, new roads, new airports, new ports, all the infrastructure. So the combination of physical and digital infrastructure has laid the foundation for something that you're going to see in the next 10 years. So I do hope you'll come every year here and see the progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nilekani. I'm going to let you eat for 10 minutes, and then we are going to come to a panel on geopolitics, which is going to be, I'm sure, markedly different, and another important conversation to have. So, Mr. Nandan, do join us for dinner. And please enjoy the meal before I turn back to you again. May I have your attention once again? We now move to a very important conversation that kicks off some of the most important issues we are going to be discussing over the days: compete, cooperate, and secure the future, connect the world, create new formats of engagement, find new avenues of growth, link demand and supply and new markets to old centers, and to do it in a world, as we have heard this evening from previous speakers, which is at best fragile, is going to be a task. And to discuss some of these opportunities and challenges, I'm delighted to invite on stage the Deputy Prime Minister of Slovenia, Her Excellency Tanja Fajon. Ma'am, may I request you to join me on stage? Hassan Al-Khatib, Minister of Investment and Foreign Trade from Egypt. Minister Boshirishvili, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Georgia. The National Security Advisor of the UK, Mr. Jonathan Powell. And the Chief Executive Officer of DP World, Rizwan Sumar. Please join me on stage. Okay. So we are just waiting for one panelist, and we can wait till we get them inside. But what we could possibly do is to let you know that once this dinner finishes, the day doesn't end. And I think that's an important note to all of you here. We have two late night conversations, one happening at the Mumtaz Hall, which is barely a few strides from here, and one at the Roshanara Hall. Very interesting conversations. Those are freewheeling late night conversations where people speak their mind because they are not being live streamed. It's being recorded and it will be edited, and then we'll put out what looks good. But the conversations are fun. Do join us. And they typically start at around 10:30, 10:20. Typically, they're meant to end at 11:15, but they end by close to midnight. And many of those conversations linger till well into the morning. So please do join us for these late night conversations. Excellent panelists, and all the themes that no diplomat or minister in this room will really talk about. So those are the themes we are speaking in those late night conversations, the real conversations. Join us for that as well. Madam, please join us on stage. Now with that, let me now moderate this panel, and I'm going to pose a few questions to our fantastic speakers. So what I thought was that before we get caught into the politics of our times and the security and other concerns of our time, let me first turn to the only business person on this panel, Rizwan, and ask him the first question. How excited are you by the opportunities of connecting the world, of trade, of continents emerging, of new geographies, creating new business avenues, of new trade routes, of new entrepreneurship? How excited are you? What is really, for you, the defining opportunities and perhaps maybe also the concerns that you may have?
Thanks, Amir. So first of all, 3,000 restrictions were kind of imposed in 2024 alone, right? But at the same time, there were FTAs signed left, right, and center. UAE signed almost 25 FTAs in the last few years. India signed about 14 FTAs, which also kind of signals a lot of bilateral trade, new trade routes actually emerging as a result. We've all heard of friendshoring, nearshoring. We've all heard of manufacturing bases actually getting closer to consumers. We've heard of new suppliers being actually chosen because there's supplier diversification that's actually taking place. Till about 5 years, 6 years back, most companies that I actually spoke to, they used to talk about only one boardroom discussion: how do I reduce my supplier base so that I actually reduce my cost? Because it's much easier to actually have a few suppliers to rely on, invest in them, invest in the relationship, and actually run your business. And now we're talking about supplier diversification. We're talking about new customers being chosen because there are restrictions being imposed. As a result, you are not able to trade with your existing customers as a result. So new trade routes emerging, and that's the exciting part. cargo flows just like water in that sense. So water will find its way, and so will cargo, essentially. The economic compulsion of trading, the economic compulsion, will drive geopolitics, is my positive view. And so therefore, a host of opportunities would result. And I'll give you a couple of examples to illustrate this point. If you look at the India and the UAE sector, we're kind of working on a virtual trade corridor where the customs of both the nations essentially would come together, share information real time. Logistic companies would actually come on one platform together with, importers, exporters, the customs, truckers, shipping companies, all sharing information real time. And if the cargo is actually cleared in India, it need not be cleared in the UAE, and that's the pilot that we're running. And the other way around, right? If the cargo is cleared in the UAE, it just flows through India to the final destination and then cleared, almost seamlessly by the importer. And this is just the pilot project. And if you look at the IMEC corridor, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, and now the US is also wanting to join in. The IMEC corridor, originally in that sense, half the world's GDP, almost 2.2 billion people it'll touch. The virtual trade corridor between India and UAE would essentially be the pilot of sorts. And similarly, we're actually working on a lot more subsets of the IMEC corridor as DP World to operationalize, to commercialize, talking about border protocols, talking about port community systems, logistic community systems, bringing the entire ecosystem literally on the same page so that the cargo actually flows seamlessly through the many nations that the IMEC corridor touches in that sense, and the cargo would flow per se. The other example is Africa, Samir. Africa, a lot of countries are landlocked. Logistics costs can be as much as 40%, 50%, 3-4 times this, the world average. Obviously, a lot of physical connectivity has to take place in Africa, and their DP World, the company that I work for, is heavily invested in the last mile connectivity, for example. Almost you could say, 200,000 points of sale in Nigeria alone. We're present in almost 35, 40 countries in Africa. The last mile connectivity is always the most difficult. The sea routes can be actually made, the IMEC and the other corridors can actually be made, but the last mile connectivity is equally important to ensure that the logistics cost is as low as possible. And we're working on the India, Middle East, Africa connectivity as another corridor, where traders from India essentially would ship cargo, go to Africa, have the last mile connectivity. Manufacturers from India would actually be given space in a special economic zone in Africa to produce so that they're actually closer to the large consumer base, but also close to the raw material availability in that sense. So we call it the Bharat-Africa Setu, or the Bharat-Africa Bridge in that sense. So the virtual trade corridor between India and UAE, the India-Africa connectivity, also via Dubai, for example. And I'll give you one example that I actually just had a customer work with DP World. We had an auto component manufacturer in India in that sense, and they had 12 points of inventory stockage in Africa. And their problem was that they were either overstocked out there or they were understocked, and they were always losing money. So we actually had them stock cargo in Dubai and then real time actually move into Africa as and when the demand actually arises. And that actually saved them almost 30-40% of their logistics cost as such. So that's a real life example of how we can actually be innovative in terms of supply chain. And we all know in Africa, the infrastructure development is critically important, but the money is also not flowing out there. It represents only about 2% of the entire supply chain spent globally of almost $2 trillion. So Africa just gets about 2%. So, connecting countries in Africa with the rest of the world, connecting Africa with Africa, are those real connectivity challenges that we all need to invest in.
But still, it's a very, very optimistic view of the world. Do you do business in Europe?
Yes, we do. We do. We do a lot of business in Europe. And of course, there are a lot of challenges out there as well. But I see a glass half full, Samir.
Okay. So let me turn to the NSA, Mr. Powell. From a business view, which seems quite positive, betting on these new emerging geographies, ignoring some of the big conflicts of this moment, and seeing the flow of cargoes eventually defining politics for the future. That's one view. In your view, as someone who's dealt with situations in the past over a long career and now is in the midst of some others, what would your NSA assessment view of the world perhaps to juxtapose to what Rizwan just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I'd be quite as optimistic from a geopolitical point of view. Something that has struck me after 17 years out of government, coming back into government, is that geopolitics is back.
Can I request you to bring your mic close to you?
Geopolitics is back with a vengeance, and we have to deal with it all the time. In Europe, certainly we have a problem of an invasion of one of our countries by another country, which we've been trying to wrestle with for 3 years. We now have an opportunity with President Trump proposing a peace process, the first person who's been able to make this happen. We have the Ukrainian government that has been indicated it's willing to enter immediately a ceasefire with no conditions, and now we're waiting for Russia to see if they will join it as well. So there's pessimism in that we've faced a war, which I thought we would no longer be seeing in Europe. There's a glimmer of hope in that President Trump is putting a real effort into trying to make peace in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people certainly want the war to end as long as it can be won on the basis, as long as it can be ended on the basis of justice and a lasting peace that they can live with. So geopolitics is back, but that doesn't mean to say that there is no hope in these cases.
And NSA, when you design some of these connectivity projects, the IMEC corridor, for example, although it may be still in its infancy, how intrinsically are they linked to the larger conception of stability and peace? Or is there just an economic efficiency argument that attracts people to bet on many of these large investments?
No, I mean, geoeconomics is intimately linked to geopolitics. I mean, in a very small and prosaic way, I worked for 10 years on a Northern Ireland peace process to end a war that had gone on for 30 years. But it was the economics that made it work in the end. It was the EU coming to invest. It was the US bringing businesses into that. And it's true on the bigger scale too. Economic issues can cause conflict, or they can actually bring about success. I noticed in a podcast interview that Prime Minister Modi has done, he talks about optimism in relations with China. Now that will partly be based on economics, what India and China can do together, but also on the politics. So if you can turn the economics, if you can turn these links into something positive, then you can change the geopolitics at the same time.
Minister, can I turn to the investment minister from Egypt, and perhaps, and you know, then I'll come to the two foreign ministers on the panel for a reality check on what we just heard. But you know, Egypt has always been at the heart of many of these flows and opportunities and trade and investments that have flowed. Given the current situation in your region, but also in Europe and some other parts, how bullish are you on the continued growth, relevance, and centrality of Egypt and the Suez Canal and projects like those that seek to define our economic futures?
Thank you. I'm actually positive. I'm new to government, and that's one of the reasons I actually accepted. I come from the private sector. I say that with full confidence. Why? Because Egypt, again, we are in a unique location. We are the center of 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia. And to manifest our historical talk about location, we need to invest in infrastructure. The reality of the matter is the last 10 years, the government of Egypt, following a revolution in 2011, 2013, invested $550 billion in massive infrastructure. We're talking about 7,000 kilometers of road, top quality roads, expansion of our ports, 6 ports on the Red Sea, as well as probably 4 to 5 major ports on the Mediterranean, almost 30 plus gigawatts of power, majority of which is actually renewable, and we have literally a program to add 65 gigawatts between now and 2040. So the needed infrastructure for what Egypt is poised as a location is there. What the role of the government, what I belong to today, is simply to create the business environment that is conducive for the private sector to lead the economic development, to make sure Egypt is as competitive as possible in clear, predictable policies, be it monetary policy, fiscal policy, trade policy, the role of the state. And what we've identified in the past seven months in the job is that we know the challenges and we know how to address the challenges. So in the previous session where we're talking about the vision in technology in India, I can tell you in every and each sector what our aspirations are. We want to get to 6-7% growth in GDP before 2030. We want to attract how much in FDI to double our tourists from where we are today to 30 million tourists, for example. Double the number of hospital beds. But more importantly is, again, we want to manifest the opportunity. But one of the greatest opportunities for Egypt is the green potential. Our location, and now our discussion with our European partners, is how to be the gateway of green energy into Europe. Our land and our, again, if you look at the composition of Egypt geography-wise, we have plenty of sun and plenty of wind. And now it's the talk how to connect Europe, and this connection is already signed, and we have connection to Saudi Arabia. So the future for Egypt will be how to not only export green electricity, but actually green ammonia and green products to Europe. That's how the narrative needs. Let me talk about, again, the Suez Canal and IMEC, as I heard my fellow panelists previously. You know, I always look, again, at the challenge. I understand the challenge that, again, there is a capacity at the Suez Canal, which some of the investors are worried, but also because of the Houthis and what is happening. And again, Egypt is the largest, unfortunately, to suffer from what is happening to the Suez Canal. In anticipation of this, I don't know if you know, we're putting a massive project, a railway, from the Ain Sokhna, from the Red Sea, to the North Coast. This is a 30 billion investment. It's a green railway system done by Siemens. So we're creating our own capacity. And this is already in place. It will be operational 50% by next year, and the follow-up years will be there. So I think the complementarities of the location and the aspiration, and I'm here to meet my counterparts in India, the foreign trade, the trade ministry and others, we have lots to do together. And I see it as complementarities, I see it as an expansion. The world is changing, but the reality of the matter, the change from globalization to bilaterals. And the bilaterals are starting. The efficiency to resilience means that we need to go onshoring, close to Europe. Our proposition in the country like Egypt is that we want to be as the most competitive country for operation, to use Egypt as a hub for the whole region. Our cost today is 40% of that in Morocco. Our cost of labor is 10% of that in Turkey, and let alone if you compare that to Europe. So our value proposition is, again today, structural reform to make us as competitive as possible, and to work with countries where we have historical ties, like India, to build these corridors together, these ties, and these are the discussions. And today I had a discussion with my counterpart, and we discussed we need to triple the trade between the two countries in 2 years. So we have a target that is achievable, but of course we need to roll up our sleeves and to put our heads together in how to expand this.
Minister, let me also ask the same question in a different context to you. Even as you plan to build out for the future opportunities and to create more connectivity and linkage projects, how are you configuring or factoring in the larger stability and peace questions of the region? And do many of these projects that you envisage today, do you believe they could contribute to that process of rebuilding societies, communities that have been affected in your region already?
I think we're in a region where instability is probably the name of the game, but I think we're blessed that, as I highlighted, look at our borders. To our west, we have Libya, we have, again, a situation. To the south, Sudan, and then, of course, to the east, where we have the Gaza situation. But I think the one cornerstone where I found, at least in my short job of the last 7 to 8 months, is every country I visited, every counterpart, be it on the government side or the business side, appreciates the stability of Egypt, appreciates the principal approach of Egypt to address these very, very difficult geopolitical challenges. And in every case, our principal approach is not to meddle. Our approach is to create peace, is to preserve the rights for the people to live in a decent way. We are the largest to provide human support to the Gazan situation for the past 2 years. This is our part. This is part. But again, our view is very clear. The Palestinian needs to live in their land. So, I mean, I don't know many people here would know. We have 9.5 million guests of Egypt. We don't call them refugees. We have 5.5 million Sudanese. They live in our cities, they mingle, they have businesses. But on the fundamental point when it comes to the Gaza situation, it's the displacement of people that we are against completely, because it's not fair. And in today's world, we have to stand by the right principles. And that's what Egypt's position is. And I think this is what will help us on the economic narrative as well. That's why that stability and this approach, principle approach, is what investors are looking, okay, now we're waiting for these policies, and that's what we're providing them to, and that's what the narrative in terms of the FDI progression would be.
Deputy Prime Minister Theon, may I turn to you now? You've heard this evening from our inaugural speaker on the challenges multilateralism is facing. Perhaps Slovenia has been the single most committed country to multilateralism over the past few years under your leadership, has been active in the UN, during a UNSC charge. Trust has been completely, in some ways, frayed and becoming insignificant in political calculuses. How does multilateralism save itself?
Yes, today I heard a lot of inspirational words, and whether we are at the crossroads, I believe we are. In a way, looking what's happening around us, Slovenia is now for the second year in the Security Council as a non-permanent member, and our motto is building trust, securing future. What I'm saying is that we are facing a lot of security challenges. Economic nationalism. The world order has been seriously challenged. And this is quite a big challenge for small countries such as Slovenia, because there is for us no better alternative than very efficient multilateralism, the international order, and also the UN Charter. And where we stand today is the time that we face the biggest number of the conflicts around the globe, the biggest number in civilian casualties, even among the humanitarian workers. In the Security Council for the last year, we didn't manage to resolve any war or conflict that is around the globe. So for small countries, this is definitely, I would say, even a greater challenge. We have to adapt to this new reality, build new partnerships, rethink our strategy. And as for Europeans, honestly, I'm coming from the region that 30 years ago, we experienced bloody wars with the fall apart of Yugoslavia. And it was our dream to reach European Union and come into the single market. That was actually meeting our dreams. And now we are building our recovery and resilience, how as a Europe, we were dependent from a strong economic, predictable environment and a rules-based order. So now we have to find new partnerships, build new alliances, build new economic ties. I was this week in the region of Southeast Asia. We were opening new embassy in Philippines. I was in Thailand after 19 years. I was today in India speaking with my counterpart. We just 2 years ago opened a new network on rebuilding science, innovation, technology, energy partnerships. So we are maybe going out or beyond these traditional partnerships that we were living in and trying to adapt to new geopolitics. But as I say, there is no alternative for us if there is no effective multilateralism and the world-based order. So how we will go beyond that, we need strong Europe. And we need a really united, enlarged, I argue, because we speak also about enlargement to the Western Balkan countries, to the Eastern Partnership. And I think Europe is still a very strong economic power with 500 million population. We have also to rebuild our resilience in a geopolitical terms. And I think we are capable of that. I see it not only as a challenge, what is happening today, but also as a huge opportunity, if we will have enough courageous and strong leadership.
You know, there are lots of questions I can ask you in Europe, but we have 2 days of European conversations, so we will save them for later. But a quick, a follow-up. You heard from the previous speakers that increasingly trade, geoeconomics, is being mediated bilaterally. In many ways, the WTO and its dysfunctionality and the efficiency of bilateral agreements and infrastructure projects has negated the need to invest in these large multilateral structures. How does that square up with global governance or the political multilateralism vis-a-vis economic multilateralism?
I mean, but we are also negotiating just this month the free trade agreement India to European Union. But bilaterally, of course, for Slovenia, we are a small market of 2 million inhabitants.
You know, when I came out of university, we were negotiating that.
Sorry?
The free trade agreement has been a long-running saga, and I hope we get it right this time. The point I'm making here is it's far more expedient to work with like-minded countries in smaller groups or individually, and there is now clearly a trend. And by the way, it's a European and American trend as well. It's not an Asian or Southeast Asian trend. The creators of multilateralism have given up on multilateralism, and they are choosing the more expedient path. How do you respond to that?
I mean, certainly on one hand, multilateralism is extremely important for us, but maybe we have to reshape it according to the new geopolitics. But if you ask me whether I'm in favor of tariffs or trade wars, or what is going on today when we see where there is no power of the rules, but just the opposite, the rules of the power, or the power prevails, I don't think that this kind of economic nationalism is really on the long run benefiting sustainable environments and economies. History proved us that usually with tariffs or trade wars, the societies were very harmed. So I'm more for a predictable, sustainable economic environment, but also opening business to like-minded partners or where are common interests.
Can I turn to the minister from Georgia, Ms. Boshrishvili? I hope I got the name nearly right.
That's right.
But you know, we heard about the larger European project, not just the EU. From the Deputy Prime Minister from Slovenia, we heard about the larger European project. Your country, in some ways, is a connectivity hub, looking at taking the North-South corridor and moving it northwards, connecting it across your own region. You're also, in many ways, striving to open up interesting sectors and domains of the economy, but you're also the hub of geopolitics. You're seeing politics play out real time, even as you think about connectivity, even as we think about economics. And you see Europe in many ways vexed over what's happening in that particular region where you belong. So how does a country like Georgia respond to these current trends, or the existing undercurrents, as it were, and find a space for themselves?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, it's great honor to be here among these distinguished guests and have this opportunity to talk about very important issues. Indeed, Georgia, maybe it's a very small country to dictate geopolitics, but it is very much the place where geopolitics meet. And together with that, of course, opportunities comes to your direction, and you have to be smart enough to use that opportunities that are coming together with this. First, probably I have to say that challenges that exist with this geopolitical environment where Georgia is, and then opportunities that are offered also with this geopolitical location. For centuries, Georgia has been connecting east-west, important country, starting from Silk Road, contributing to east-west connectivity. And from the very early days of our independence from Soviet Union, Georgia started to think about that, how we can play that role again in modern world. And number of very important projects has been implemented together with our neighbors, together with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, and that, of course, with support of our strategic partners, and that is important to mention. And these projects are still, after decades, very important in a sense that these projects have potential to contribute to wider European security connectivity, when it comes energy connections, when it comes connectivity in terms of transport and so on and so forth. But potential is huge. I recently was traveling in Central Asian countries. I visited Kazakhstan, visited Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and this cooperation with neighboring countries, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Armenia, of course, these are important partners for us. And what is also very important, Black Sea and Black Sea connectivity. A long-standing intention of Georgia was to turn Black Sea into connecting sea with the European Union rather than dividing sea. We have these opportunities now, and we have to work and we have to invest in that, because together we can do very serious projects that will benefit the European Union, Europe. We consider ourselves as part of Europe, and part of European security concerns us as well, and that will be beneficial for wider European region. When it comes potential that exists to our east, it's huge, and huge opportunities that comes together with middle corridor and developing of middle corridor, and that is definitely our intention to invest in infrastructure projects and to use with full capacity whatever these opportunities can bring to Georgia. Well, Caspian Sea, Black Sea, energy connectivity, transport connectivity, plenty of projects that can be or are being implemented already via Georgia, and that will be beneficial for smaller region. But something very important needs to be mentioned. Peace, which is essential, very important, peace and security. I'm talking about small regions, South Caucasus, which is very vibrant, I would say. We are very much we are supporting and encouraging our neighbors, Armenia and Azerbaijan, too, and we are very happy that they announced just that they found a solution to peace deal, and that's very important for our region. But Georgia still has two regions occupied by Russia, and that still remains as a very serious threat to security to our region. For me, as a Georgian diplomat for a long time, it was always very difficult how to explain on one side these security threats that comes from Russian occupation, and on the other hand, how to explain huge opportunities that exist there. And it was a very difficult task, and it is still a very difficult task, because occupation remains, security threats remains, but we have to respond somehow to the opportunities. And this response is definitely economic development, right reforms, and if you look at the global rankings, Georgia, you will find Georgia in top countries when it comes doing business, when it comes open governments, and when it comes corruption index, and these leading propositions are result of right policies that government implements, especially last 10 years, and that is the result how we are countering, I would say, that security challenges that we have in the region.
I think something you said is really, in many ways, at the crux of what we are all trying to do today. How do you balance the opportunities of globalization or re-globalization or a new form of globalization with national security and the strategic imperatives? And I think to close this conversation this evening, perhaps I could turn to all of you, and maybe I can turn to the Deputy Prime Minister from Slovenia first, that if you were given a pen to write a few thoughts that would shape the future, that would balance security and trade and commerce and multilateralism, what would those one or two ideas be for us to ponder over for the next 2 days at this conference? What should be different in multilateralism of tomorrow that can balance both economic opportunities and politics?
If I pencil one word, I would say trust. Because I think the trust is a key in everything we do. So that means that if you want to pursue the dialogue or partnership, it always means that you have to listen to each other, also to hear each other and to understand each other. So if I pencil one word, I think the key is trust.
And Slovenia has been doing a lot of work on building trust. So well done, Deputy Prime Minister. Let me turn to the Minister for Egypt. What would your advice be to all of us as we balance security, peace, and economic opportunities in our national matrix?
I think a couple of words: resilience, agility. We're in a changing world. We, as government, as a member of government now, I think we need to be as agile as possible, as adaptive as possible when we talk about artificial intelligence and the new technologies that will affect every and each member of our societies, whether we like it or not. It's a fact, it's the reality. But as government, we need to build resilience, be it on policies, geopolitical, as you highlighted, but also in economic terms. And agility, because we need to move fast. We cannot, our deep, old systems needs to adapt very, very quickly. From the established norms and relationships, we need to start think outside of the box, building these bilaterals, expand markets that are not yet tapped. This is what we're trying to do now. It's the agility, it's the speed that we have to adapt in a very, very much changing world.
The Minister from Georgia.
Well, probably I would say dialogue and cooperation. That's very important. And we have plenty of challenges, and only way how you can find response to these challenges and ways out, probably it should be through dialogue. And when we have dialogue, of course, trust is very important, and trust is absolutely important to highlight as an argument.
Mr. Powell.
Yeah, I mean, let me just take the example of the United Kingdom to illustrate the point. About 10 years ago, we left the European Union, so we're no longer in any blocs. We've been obsessed with ourselves for the last 10 years. We've been inward-looking, not outward-looking. And now we have an opportunity, as a result of what's happened in geopolitics, to re-engage with the outside world. What's happened is that Britain has been welcomed back into Europe in terms of security discussions. We've had a series of meetings over the last several weeks, chaired by President Macron or chaired by Prime Minister Keir Starmer, where we're trying to coordinate the position of Europe and how we're going to react to what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. We are thinking about putting a European force onto the ground in Ukraine in the context of a peace agreement. Things you never thought about would happen 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think that looking for the opportunity where you can cooperate with others, where you can come back into relevance in the world, as I believe the British government now has, after 10 years of frankly being pretty irrelevant.
Rizwan, what would you advise the governments you work with?
So I think it's about building supply chain resilience, because we saw what COVID actually did to semiconductors. We saw what it did to the auto industry. We saw the disruption that actually happened and the economic fallouts that actually resulted. And so therefore, creation of these alternate corridors, right? And not actually, we're not saying that we take away cargo from the Suez, from the Malacca Straits, from the Panama Canal, right? But to actually create alternate corridors to actually increase supply chain resilience. And obviously, there's a lot of geopolitics actually involved, but wherever we see an opportunity to commercialize, operationalize corridors, we must actually seize those opportunities. And my company clearly is at the forefront of doing that. We're almost mapped about 20-25 routes, essentially, globally, where we're working very, very actively with governments to actually see how the economic compulsions can override some of the geopolitics that the panel discussed today.
So I think this is a fantastic way to end this conversation. 4 words I take away: trust, agility, resilience, and most importantly, dialogue. So I think that's a good way to begin the Raisina dialogue, the importance of dialogue and conversations to build trust and to find ways to be nimble and resilient. So thank you very much. Please join me in applauding this panel for their interventions, and we will continue our dinner this evening.